Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Thrive Co-Living Communities YouTube podcast. I'm Mark Stein, Thrive founder and your podcast host. We're creating sustainable, inclusive, and multi-generational residential communities. Our mission is to combat the epidemic of isolation, revitalize communities, and help others discover the many benefits of engaged community living by offering unique and ecologically sustainable co-living options. In this podcast series, join us as we discuss co-living, in addition to bringing you interesting people from around the world who are doing cool things to expand your knowledge and satisfy your curiosity. Through this podcast, learn more about our concept and see how Thrive co-living communities will bring together people from all walks of life who want to enjoy the best of independent and group living. To find out more about us, please visit our website at thrivecolivingcommunities.org. Thanks for watching and enjoy the podcast. Welcome to the Thrive Co-Living Communities podcast. I'm your host, Mark Stein. I'm here today with my guest, Scott Drake. He's a social entrepreneur and leadership training innovator. After going through his own long and difficult journey into leadership, Scott decided to use his real-life experiences to help next generation leaders avoid the mistakes that he himself made. This led him to create his Delegation Grid framework, which he uses to help business owners fix delegation problems, reduce stress, and improve the productivity of their entire team. Thanks for joining me, Scott, and welcome to the Thrive Co-Living Communities podcast.
Hey, Mark, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to come on.
Great. So we really should start with a summary of that journey that you made into leadership. So talk a little bit about your background and what led you to this passion for the topic of delegation.
Yeah, so my background, I come out of a technology background. I was a computer programmer and kind of was very good at that. I was very successful at it. I spent some time working at Microsoft, spent some time working at startups. So I kind of had a good career in that track. And like a lot of people who are really good at what they do, you get tapped on the shoulders and you're asked to lead a team, you're asked to manage a team. And, kind of as I rose through the ranks of management, I kind of made all the mistakes that there are to make in management. And most of it was around, micromanaging and not really being able to work through others. Like I was really good at doing things myself, but I wasn't good at working through other people. And it took me about 5 years to realize that I was not doing a good job. And then it took me about another 5 years to kind of figure out what to do better. And, and as I got into the executive roles and I had managers working for me, I started seeing them have all the same struggles that I had been through, right? They were the experts who suddenly were expected to lead and work through other people and set their expertise aside and be able to delegate and do those kinds of things. So I thought there's got to be a faster way to teach this. And yeah, when I couldn't find the way to do that, then I kind of embarked on a research project and invented it. I was working at the time in medical education, so I kind of have an education background as well. And I took some of that knowledge and expertise and said, how do we teach delegation? How do we shortcut this and make it easier to learn? So that's a little bit of my background, and then kind of how I ended up in this direction. Right, it was to solve a problem that I needed to solve for my team.
And delegation is hard anyway, but when you take someone from the technical ranks and move them into management, and if they don't have leadership management training, this I'm sure happens all the time, as well as in other leadership and management areas. Should people be promoted into management without an MBA?
Yeah, it definitely doesn't require an MBA, right? I mean, I don't have an MBA. I've studied a lot. I've probably studied more than most PhDs in a lot of ways, but yeah, so it doesn't really require an MBA. Most role players are actually good at most parts of management, right? Management breaks down into 5 pieces. Somebody needs to set goals for the team. Somebody needs to set the vision and goals. Somebody needs to make a plan. Somebody needs to say, what resources do we need to do this? Somebody needs to build situational awareness and feedback loops so that, because no plan survives going to market, right? That kind of thing. So as the plan is executed, there needs to be somebody making adjustments to that plan, right? Those first 4 pieces were all things I was great at as an individual contributor, right? Why does Scott have management potential? It's because Scott is great at those 4 things, as well as being an expert at what he was doing. But that 5th piece of management is that working through other people. It's the leadership piece of it. And that's where, so many of us just again, our egos are attached to being the expert, or, my identity was wrapped up in being the best computer programmer. And all of a sudden I've got to start elevating other people, and find a way to work through them instead of doing things myself. So yeah, it's really, anybody can learn it. They just got to want to, right? And it doesn't require an MBA.
Cool. So before we get into focusing on delegation, talk about other areas of leadership and management that are difficult for people that are trained in a technical space to do. What are some of the other pitfalls, leadership pitfalls, when people move from that technical specialized role into management?
Yeah, so a lot of it comes down to there's kind of 3 parts. There's the skills, right? So there's just certain skill things, like delegation is part of a skill. There's also what I call the will, right? You got to want to do it. Right? You got to want to detach your ego from being an expert in whatever you were before and attach your ego to something new, right? You've got to want to do that. And if you don't want to do that, then you're going to struggle. No matter what kind of skills you have or anything else, you're just not going to do very well. But then the 3rd piece, there's a skill, there's a will, and then there's emotional intelligence, which is recognizing that, hey, there are these very predictable things that are going to derail me, right? There's very predictable things, like when a teammate would come and say, Scott, I'm stuck. Can you help me solve this problem? Scott, the expert, would often just take the problem away and do it himself, right? So that's an emotional response and a frustration and impatience that I would have when coaching somebody, where, so what you really have to learn is to recognize those moments that are going to derail you and have the emotional intelligence to respond in a much more empowering way, right? So it's really kind of those 3 things that have to be brought, elevated in the expert to help them become an effective manager, an effective leader.
Emotional intelligence is a term that's bannered about a lot in management circles these days. Should we step back and talk a little bit about emotional intelligence? Maybe give not a dictionary definition, but a working definition, and talk about what that encompasses. I think it's pretty important.
Yeah. I mean, if you've ever heard the phrase, hey, that person's emotions got the best of them, right? You think about that, you hear some of that kind of stuff. And emotional intelligence was kind of discovered back in the 1980s by researchers, and they were kind of looking at the statistic that people with average intelligence outperform people with high intelligence 70% of the time. Right. So if intelligence, if book smarts, if raw brain power isn't a predictor of success, what is a predictor of success? And what they ended up discovering is this thing called emotional intelligence, which is really an ability for people to recognize situations where they emotionally respond in ways that aren't productive. They get frustrated, they get angry, right? They get they feel guilty delegating things instead of just doing it themselves, right? There are all these types of stressors and things that cause us emotions. And it's really about recognizing the things that cause us emotion and then being able to have that self-control to say, I'm not going to act on this. I can feel it and I recognize I feel it, but I know it's not healthy to act on it. So it's 4 things. It's understanding my own emotions and being able to control them. And then it's also being able to recognize the emotions in others, and then being able to build good relationships and healthy relationships with people, in spite of the emotional things that can kind of sometimes get in the way. So it really is, it is the most important thing, in my opinion, for leaders. It's if they can't or won't or don't want to do that, then they're really going to struggle as a leader, because there are so many things that are going to trigger stress and emotions that you just have to learn how to manage yourself when you're in a management role, right? It's just a different level of stress than as a role player.
Has it been studied and documented whether males, the difference between males and females in terms of emotional intelligence?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't personally seen anything, but I haven't really sought that out. So yeah, so I'm not sure.
Okay. You reminded me of a story. When I was in college, I had a math TA, and he said he had just gone through his interview for graduate school in mathematics, and the interviewer looked at his scores, and there's, like a lot of these standardized tests, there's the math part and the verbal part. And the math he was almost 100%. And the verbal was like 30 when they give you 25 just for showing up.
Yeah.
And the interviewer was scratching his head and digging and looking into his records, and he goes, excellent math score, but with a verbal score of 30, our records show that you shouldn't even be able to talk. So, you know, and I think that's a prime example that the sciences, the technology tend to draw left brain people into it that have not necessarily exercised these skills.
Yeah.
So let's move into delegation. Unless there's something that we really should talk about before that. Any other precursors?
No, I don't think so. I think we can get into it.
Okay. So this is a challenge for probably almost everybody. So first of all, why is it so difficult? What are the obstacles to us delegating effectively?
Yeah, so there's three that I kind of point out a lot. And first is that a lot of people kind of struggle in management as a whole because they don't understand what it means, right? What does it mean to be a manager? Like the first time my first role as a lead, as a manager, I had left Microsoft and I was back in my home in Kentucky, and I got a call from my boss from Microsoft who had left and had gone to Silicon Valley to start a company. He's like, hey, Scott, you want to come and run a team for me? And I said, sure, that's great. That's the type of opportunity I was looking for, right? But I got out there and I didn't really understand what it meant to be a manager, right? So it was really easy for me to keep falling back into my old work of being the doer instead of being the leader. So why do people struggle to delegate? Why do they just don't really, number one, they're never even trained on what it means to step into that new role and what that new role is. That's one. The second we talked about a little bit, which is that their ego often remains attached to the job. So Scott was his ego was very much attached to being a computer programmer, not leading other computer programmers. So in a lot of times we put people, especially the younger managers, have to wear both hats, right? Sometimes they need to be a doer and sometimes they need to be a leader. And that's the hardest thing to do, is to switch hats, right? And we put it on the most inexperienced manager who has no idea they need to do this, right? They don't need that. They don't know that I have one mindset when I'm doing one type of work and a different mindset when I'm leading, right? So that's part of it. And then the third is, they don't really have core skills in delegation, right? Delegation is, tend to take a kind of a simplistic view of it. We think, oh, we got to delegate tasks. We've got to be able to tell people what to do. We got to be able to show people what to do. But there's really, delegation is kind of a broader topic in that you have to delegate tasks and problems and then management responsibilities. And there's different things we have to delegate, and those all need different strategies. And there's different levels of trust with people, and those all need different strategies, right? So it's kind of a little bit bigger field than people think. A lot of people just take a very simplistic view to it. So it's really kind of those three things are part of what make it hard.
And so what's your advice? Give us a lesson.
Yeah, so it really does come down to the skills, the will, and the emotional intelligence, right? So the skills around delegation are kind of what I learned and kind of what I built into my training. Like what was I missing when I was starting out? Like that first 5 years, what was I missing? And then the next 5 years, what did I learn? What did I figure out? And I did figure out there's three types of things we delegate. We delegate tasks. which if you think about a business, there are systems in place and you can show somebody how to do it. And most people are just following the system. It's like a recipe at a restaurant, right? You just follow the recipe, right? You can teach people to do it. You can show people how to do it. It's pretty straightforward. There's problems, which, a lot of times the businesses are also full of problems. Like there are exceptions to the recipe. Like, hey, we run this process normally, but here's something that's a little bit weird. Here's an odd case. It doesn't really fit. Right? How do we solve this problem and do it differently? Or how do we, we're bringing a new product to market. We're going into a new market. We're introducing new technologies, right? Some of those kind of things are problems, which you need to be able to delegate, right? You need to be able to work through somebody else to solve these problems. But that requires a completely different type of delegation because you can't show them how to do it. It's not a process you can train people on, right? You need to go through an inventive learning process. But instead of doing it yourself, you have to let somebody else do it. You have to coach somebody else through that process of problems. And then the third type is again, management responsibilities, where like when I was in my last executive role, I was responsible for all the technology, but I would carve off parts of my responsibility, like our cloud infrastructure and some of those pieces, and delegate them to other people. And what I'm delegating is the planning and is the organization of resources and is the building situational awareness and those kinds of things. So I'm delegating something completely different there, right? I don't want to have to do the thinking there. I'm delegating the thinking off to somebody else. So it's really, that's the first big thing I learned, is that I had much too simplistic of a view of it. I was just trying to turn everything into a task, which is why, the manager ends up working 80 hours a week and the team is bored, is because they're trying to do all the thinking and then delegate a simpler task. Where what they need to do is be able to build skills up in all three of those areas to be able to delegate different types of things. So I'll pause there. There's another thing that's kind of part of that, but I'll pause there and give you a chance to ask any questions on that piece of it.
The ability of the assignee is really important here, I think. What's the extent of their expertise, their knowledge, their emotional intelligence, their ability to problem solve. And, I think it's hard to assess that, and sometimes when you think they are capable, they don't pan out.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably the first question mark that comes to my mind.
So that actually segues perfectly into the second piece, which is that there's three different types of things I need to be able to delegate: tasks, problems, and management responsibility. But then I needed to be able to delegate at different levels of trust. So if I have low trust with a person, then I need to delegate differently than if I have total trust with the person. So if I have a new relationship with somebody and there's no external proof, then I need to be able to give them something, right, that lets us work together so that they can prove themselves and I can learn what that person's capabilities are. And one of two things needs to happen. Through that work, trust needs to build so that I can begin to hand off more and hand off different things and interact with them in a different way. Or if I recognize that they don't have the skills or capabilities that I may have thought they did, then I can put them into performance management. At that point, I can either start training them or shift them into different roles or those kinds of things. So I was trying to just assume that everybody was competent. And then I would get frustrated. Right. And that's, again, that goes back to the emotional intelligence. And I would just start taking things away and they would get frustrated because, number one, I wasn't communicating well. I wasn't delegating well. I wasn't, I wasn't doing a very good job in any level of delegation. So everybody just ended up frustrated. So yeah, so there's 4 levels of trust, right? 3 different types of things you need to delegate. So there's 12 strategies. And delegating a task to a low trust person, you're going to do that very, very differently than you would, say, delegating management responsibility to somebody you've worked with for 3 years that you have total trust in. Mm-hmm. So it's really about recognizing you have those different levels of trust, and you have to have different strategies in each of those cases.
And quite often you can't really test before, you can't test beforehand sometimes. You just have to give it to them, see how they do, I guess, keep them on a short leash, and maybe ask for documentation or confirmation or some sort of feedback really quickly. Is that the case?
So let's say we're delegating a task where there's a system in place. Let's say I need somebody to update social media for this week, right? We have systems in place, we have programs in place. I can actually show them how to do it. So the lowest level of trust, what's going to happen is I'm going to show them how to do it. right? I'm going to show them, and I'm going to explain why we do things the way we do. I'm going to start building context with that person, because what I want to see is I want to see good judgment. But good judgment requires that they understand why we do things the way we do them. A lot of times we just want to show people what to do, but we don't really explain why we do things the way we do. Then we never build a context for that person, so they never can exhibit good judgment, right? Mm-hmm. So the lowest level, you're going to show them how to do it. The second level is you're going to let them do it, but you're going to coach as they do it, right? You're just going to sit with them as they do it, and you're going to be able to correct and coach. Go up one more level and they can do it and just report back. But yeah, it's going to be on a smaller chunks. You're not going to hand off a week's worth of work. You're going to hand off smaller chunks of work. And then as you get to total trust, then that's where they have proven themselves and you trust their judgment, and they know you and they know what your expectations are. And at that point, you can actually just kind of turn them loose, right? For problem solving, it is, you ask them to research something and report back. You don't say, hey, go solve this problem and come back with a perfect solution. You just say, go do the research. And then you go up a level of trust and you say, well, research it and make a recommendation. And let me know why that recommendation, right? Third level of trust is you just say, decide and tell me what your decision criteria was. And I may adjust that 10% of the time. I might come back and say, hey, we learned something in that learning loop. We learned something there that I want to change. So you might, make some adjustments. And the fourth level is that you're really just kind of, again, handing things off. So you have those different strategies, which helps you know how you need to behave as a delegate, the person doing the delegation, and then sets the expectations for them as to what they should receive and what you're asking of them.
Mm-hmm. One of the areas that I'm having some difficulty on in terms of managing my workload is I'm sort of the hub for a lot of different things, and two major teams, and I'm also account representative. So I am the main client-facing person, and setting strategy and asking them to implement. I don't quote Ronald Reagan very often, but one thing he did say that was notable is trust but verify. I think it was in regards to the Soviets at the time. So I ask people to confirm when they've completed a task, or that they've executed what I've asked them to do. And that follow-up to monitor just their confirmation takes a fair amount of time, because I do need to look into it and be sure they understood me, be sure I explain things clearly. So, but I'm spending a good bit of time just confirming that my request and delegation has been accomplished. I have a high level of trust for both people that are in these roles. What mainly could happen would be miscommunication. They didn't get an email, they didn't see an email, they misunderstood something. But if I could, and I'm not sure I can offload that checking up on. So what are your thoughts there? But and one other thing, if I could trust that those things are going to happen in the way that they're happening, then I could stop asking for that confirmation. There's some risk there. But so what are your thoughts? That's a real life example, and it takes a good bit of time.
So the first thing is that management takes time. Management isn't free, right? Managers, in one of my last roles, there was one of my counterparts was over a different part of the business, but he was very involved in the day-to-day of the business. And he was so involved in the day-to-day of the business, he did not have time to actually do the things that managers need to do, right? There are, managers have a job. They have to set goals. They have to make plans. They have to, have that back and forth with their teams. They have to build situational awareness of all the work that's happening in their sphere of responsibility. So it just takes time. And if you don't have time to do that as a manager, then you're probably doing too much, right? Or you're doing too many of the things that you shouldn't be doing anymore as a manager, right? So that's the first thing that I tend to try to coach people when they get in that situation. The second, it would be, and this is where I would suggest to start thinking about how can you carve off pieces of that management and give it to somebody else. You can delegate the management itself to somebody else. So then what would happen is, instead of you having conversations 3 times a day as problems are solved or tasks are carried out, right? You have delegated off a lot of that follow-up work and a lot of that management work to somebody else. And then you would have maybe a weekly reporting meeting with that person. So once a week, you sit down with that person, and it's more of a, here were your goals for the week. Here's the, for your sphere of responsibility. Here's how we judge success. Here are the things that we measure. So once a week, you have a reporting meeting with that person as a manager, right? Manager to manager. So it's really accepting that it just takes time, but that's your job, right? Mm-hmm. If you want to work through other people, if you want to delegate, that is what the job is. And you just have to adjust your capacity to what you can, what you take on, what you take with your responsibility has to match the capacity that you have to do those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. What I've started doing very recently is just adding an extra hour to my day very early in the morning before my appointments, because all of these confirmations are all coming by email. Mm-hmm. So it's just a matter of having that time to go through that. I do value, and I think a lot of companies value, having a relatively flat organization. So we don't have middle managers. Mm-hmm. We have me, and we have people that are doing the work at the lowest level, who are executing the work, and no other people between me and those people. There's some drawbacks there, but I also value offering a very cost-effective service, so it helps me keep prices down for our clients by having that flat organization.
Yeah. But one thing I'll say, and I run into this a lot, like literally, like there's one company I'm working with right now. That's one of the first things he said, Scott, we're a very flat organization. But being a flat organization doesn't mean management doesn't need to happen. Just because you don't have managers doesn't mean that your team doesn't need managing, right? Your team, if you want your team to be happy and effective and productive and do great work and like working for you and not quit next week to go someplace else, they require a certain amount of management attention. And if you're not giving the team that attention, then having a flat organization isn't going to help you, right? So it's really going to be the balancing act that you're going to run into, and you're running into it now, like you're adding hours to your day. But eventually you're going to run out of hours to add to your day. And you're going to have to say, okay, I can't add more hours and maintain the lifestyle I want to lead. So I have to find the way at a certain point. And you don't have to delegate management responsibility to a manager, right? You can take somebody who's a non-manager, but who's good at planning, who's good at giving feedback, who's good at making decisions, and you can give some of that management responsibility to other people. So that's really where, again, that's part of delegation. That's the third piece of delegation that I didn't understand early on, and that, that really helps unlock the capacity of your team, but it also helps you stay sane and not have to keep adding hours to your day to deal with all the management work that has to happen.
Mm-hmm. And on second thought, I really misspoke. I have 2 project managers that direct 2 different teams. So I am not directing all of those people. Yeah. They are in the middle, but I don't have anyone anyway. So I do have 3 layers. Okay, that's very helpful. And it probably is helpful for you in these kinds of interviews to have some concrete problems to work on.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's normal, right? Everything you just said is so normal that I see in so many of my clients, that those are the things that they're struggling with. But it makes such a big difference, right? It just makes such a difference. Again, I like to get up early because I can get up early and I can work for a couple hours and I don't have to talk to a lot of people and I can just get stuff done, right? But I can only get up early for so much, right? And eventually I have to move past that. So yeah, it's very normal.
Let's talk about technique. So we know it's valuable to delegate. Let's talk about how you delegate, because I bet that's important too.
Yeah.
Not just tone, but substance and style. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so there's really 7 steps that I tend to everything I'm going to delegate, whether it's a task or a problem or a responsibility, I'm going to go through 7 steps on. All right, and the first is I'm just going to answer 3 questions to myself, which is, what am I delegating? What type of thing is this? What's my level of know-how on this? right? Is this something that I know a lot about, or is this something that I don't know a lot about? Is this something that I have a ton of opinions on, or is this something that I can give some space? And I'm really going to look for somebody who can maybe come in and tell me what to do a little bit on some types of things, right? And then I'm going to look at what's the risk, right? What's kind of the risk on this? Is this kind of something that's high risk? Is it something that's kind of low risk? Some of those kind of things. So I'm going to answer just some of those questions to myself in preparation. Second step is I'm going to say, who's available? Who do I want to delegate this to, right? And then based on what it is and the type of thing it is and the risk of it and my relationship with this person and how much I trust that person, then I'm going to go and I'm going to pick one of those 12 strategies. And I'm going to say, if I'm delegating a task at a medium level of trust, then I need to approach it this way. Or if I'm delegating a responsibility at this level of trust, I'm going to go about it a different way. So it's really about stopping and doing a little bit of work in your head. And that can happen in 10 seconds or something quick, or it may take you 30 minutes to really sit down and think about what you're doing. The fourth step is then to have that conversation, which is to make the assignment. And again, the lower levels of trust, what you're trying to do is give that person context, right? You don't just want to be an order, just giving orders and telling people what to do and not giving them context. So it's really about, why is this important? Why are we doing things the way we're doing things? If we already have systems in place and some of those kinds of things, why do we do those things? So again, what I'm trying to build is their ability to exhibit good judgment. If they don't understand why we do things the way we do them, they're never going to have good judgment, right? So that's kind of the fourth. The fifth is negotiate, which is basically to say you're having this conversation with that person, but what are the check-in points? Like, if it's a low trust situation, check back in with me in an hour, right? Work on this for an hour and let's talk about it again. If it's problem solving, again, it's, hey, go research it and come back in 2 days with the research that you've done, that kind of stuff. So it's really negotiating. What do I need next out of you? What are the next steps on this? What level of trust am I interacting with you intentionally at, right? I go to that level where I take this grid that I have, you can print it out, and I give that to my team. So they understand I'm interacting with you differently on this than on something else because it's a different thing, right? You need to be able to check in, track, give support, work with them, coach them as they go through it. And then the seventh step is really to celebrate and then give feedback, right? So you want feedback from them, what's going well from their perspective, you want to give feedback, right? So it's really those 7 steps, no matter what it is that you're delegating and whether it's something that's going to get done in 30 minutes or something that you're going to work on for the next 60 days, you're really going to sit in those 7 steps and do some of those things. So that's really from a tactical, that's a very high level of how I teach people to go about delegating.
How do you know when you're not doing it well? What kind of cues do you get from your reports? I don't know if that's the proper term, but from the people you're delegating to, how can you tell when you're not doing well? Other than the obvious, they're quitting, like dropping like flies, and lots of conflict in the workplace. I don't know. How do we know when we're doing it well?
So I answered a couple of different ways. Some signs a manager is struggling, right? If we all say and we all feel that it's faster and easier to do it myself, right? So it's one thing to say it and it's one thing to feel it, but then it's another thing to never delegate because everything is faster and easier if I do it myself, right? So if you see that in yourself and you see that in a manager, that way too often you're falling back on that excuse to not delegate something. Again, delegation takes time, management takes time, but it is ultimately a time multiplier. Like you ultimately, if you can tap into the work of 3 people or 5 people, then those 5 people are going to far outwork you, right? Even if you have to spend 100% of your time managing those people, right? So it's really, is it faster and easier to do myself? If I can't get people to work to my standards, right? I hear that one all the time. How do I get people to work to my standards? Right? That's a challenge of, again, not giving context. You're basically saying, how do I get people to exhibit judgment that matches mine? So that's number one, an expectation that's unrealistic, right? Nobody else is going to exhibit the exact same judgment you do because they don't have the exact same experience you do. But when we don't give context, which again, that takes time, right? It's an investment in the person to give them that context, to prepare it and delegate with it. It takes management time. But without it, then people are never going to work to your standards or work to a standard that meets the standards that you have, right? So some of those kinds of things, right? So there's a handful of those things that managers say all the time. I wish my team had an ownership mentality. I wish they would, bring me solutions instead of just problems. So there's a lot of those kind of things can kind of be a sign that the manager is struggling. But ultimately, productivity issues. If your team just isn't producing as much as you think it should based on the number of people you have on it, if you add 2 people to a team and if you've doubled the number of people on the team, but it hasn't doubled the productivity of the team, then that's often the bottleneck of a manager. Employee engagement, motivation, stress as the manager. Again, how many hours a day can the manager keep adding, without getting burned out and stressed, and some of those kinds of things are some of the things you'll see. There's just, it is delegation is a root problem for a lot of other management problems and a lot of other problems that you see in a business.
Let me give you a good story about how important it is to delegate. So when I first delegated the bookkeeping function and got a team to handle it, I had them listing the expenses and managing the expenses, but the invoicing, that's so important that I need to be doing that. I need to be pulling the information together from the different sources on billing properly. So I finally got overwhelmed with it, that task, and I bet it's this way for other small business owners too, where we feel like we've got to write the check or send the bill. So I finally delegated it to this team that had been working with me for 6 months probably. So I had a fairly high level of trust. It was just that last part that I thought was so important that I couldn't let go. So I let it go, and day one, they came to me and said, that when they were doing the invoices, they said, this particular invoice has been charged to a bogus account. There's not a credit card associated with it. It was some fictitious account that had been set up somewhere by QuickBooks. So it amounted to 8 months worth of invoices that were not properly billed and paid for. So it was thousands of dollars. And for a small business, thousands of dollars is pretty important. Yeah. So the very first day that I assigned that and had them take it over, they paid for the service probably for a year. Yeah. Just with that one mistake.
Yeah. I mean, people are better than you. Like, you can't do it. You can't be great at everything. Right. And that's, when I work with owners, it's really like, a lot of them like to hold on to signing the checks. And it's like, I totally get that. Right. There's certain things you just want to hang on to. You hang on to it. Right. But you've really got to look and say, what are the things you have to do? Right. And then what are the things that you don't really have to do? And then you have to be willing to kind of give some of those up. So yeah, that's a great story. That's a great example.
And I gave up another one of my last things that I've been holding on to, and that's the company credit card number. I gave that to a trusted assistant that helps me with lots of different things, because I found myself ordering the business cards for several of us. I should not be spending my time ordering the business cards, but I had the credit card. Yeah. So she got the credit card number today. Yeah. So that's another hard one, I would imagine. It's the purse strings, isn't it?
Yeah. Again, it's risk. Like, so you sit there and you go, the risk feels too high for me to do this. So that's why I'm just going to hold it, or I'm going to even delegate it at a different level. Like, I normally trust this person, but the risk feels so high that I'm going to lower my level of trust and delegate in a different way with this person just because I feel risk. Right. So that's all normal. I mean, that's all normal stuff, but you just have to be, it goes back to, I said, the skills, the will, and then the emotional intelligence. Right. And that's kind of a will. That's kind of a will issue, right? Do you have the will to do it? And then do you have the emotional intelligence to do it? It's not about the skills anymore. It's just purely about, the will and the emotional intelligence to do it.
And I teased her today. I said, if you're going to use this for personal gain, like a trip, go as far as you can, because there's probably not a limit on it. I don't think there's a limit to this American Express. So really do it well, and go to Antarctica or the North Pole or Iceland also go somewhere where it's going to be hard to find you.
Yeah, really make it count and make it worthwhile.
Make it good.
Yeah.
So, um, so what do people need to tell themselves? We've talked about the obstacles. We've talked about the different steps to do it. We've got to reorient ourselves to make this happen and to feel free to do the delegating. So what are the sorts of things that you tell your clients and that clients need to continue to reinforce within themselves to be successful at delegating?
So that really touches on the will piece, right? The skills, the will, right? You got to have the will to do it. You got to want to do it. And that often boils down to, there's something that psychologists call an expert mindset. And the expert mindset is kind of, as we kind of progress, we how we interpret the world, how we interact with the world can change over time. Like as we interact with the world certain ways, we discover it doesn't work very well, and we adapt and we adjust, right? But a lot of people kind of still have that expert mindset where they feel like they're very assertive with how they want things to be done. They feel like they have to be the one to solve the problems. Like, again, a lot of us, you're rewarded in school for having the answers, not for, if you get the answers off somebody else's test, then that's, cheating, right? So a lot of our rewards, growing up, and our rewards throughout work and everything else are about our own competence. And you really kind of have to set aside that it is no longer about your own competence. It's not even about how you want to get things done, that it's about, you have to let that go. And that's not an easy thing to do, right? But you have to want to do that, right? That's kind of one of those will things. You have to be willing to let go the how on things that you don't deem are super high risk. Things that you think are critically important for your business are the things that maybe you want to hang on to a little bit tighter. But the things that happen in every single business, like the bookkeeping happens in every single business. Why does it have to be your way? Why can't it be the industry standard way of doing things? But so often when we build these businesses, it's about us and how we did it and some of those kinds of things. So the starting point is really just to say, I've got to set aside my way of doing things. I have to set aside my idea of perfection, give up on your own definition of perfection, and just kind of be willing to let other people, help you. So that's really kind of where I start with a lot of people, is with that expert mindset, to basically say, here are the things you can kind of see and recognize that you're acting from this mindset, and you just really kind of have to let go. And when people are coached to do it, a lot of times they'll go, oh, all right, it's permission. They can kind of let go of things that maybe they've been holding on to for too long. So that's really the starting point, is to really just start to let go of the things that aren't truly critical to what's going to make your business or your team or your department successful.
I think one thing that's helped me let go some is of that phenomenon is shifting to allowing myself to make mistakes and allowing my team to make mistakes, and having a growth mentality, that I'm learning, I'm changing. One thing that I say to my team is, let's work not to make the same mistakes. Let's make different mistakes. We're going to make mistakes. It's going to happen. We're human, but let's make different mistakes. So I think normalizing the fact that we're learning, we're growing, we're changing, and giving myself that permission perhaps helps me give my team that permission. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's absolutely core to problem solving, right? So you have tasks where you have a system and you can teach somebody how to do the system. And then you have problems where you don't really even know when you start out exactly what the final solution is going to look like. You can't necessarily teach somebody how to do this. You can't really train them how to do it. But when you solve problems, you go through 6 steps. And the 6 steps are very predictable, which is that you set the goal, or you state the problem. You define as best you can the trade-offs, like, are there cost factors, time factors? When do we need this done? What does success look like? You try to set some of that kind of stuff. 3rd step is you brainstorm options. 4th step, you choose an option. The 5th step is when you get to planning and implementing. But as we talked about earlier, you get to that plan and implement, and you realize, okay, this won't work, right? We've learned something new here, right? This is a learning loop that we have to go into. And when I learn something new in that fifth step, I have to go back to step one and say, does this change the goal? Does this change our objective? Does it change any of our decision criteria? Do we need to brainstorm new options? Do we need to choose a new option? Do we, so you end up in these learning loops. And when you do the work yourself, those learning loops happen mostly in your head, right? You don't really realize that you're failing, you're making mistakes, you're having to go back to step one and start over. But when you delegate that problem to somebody else, those learning loops are become very, very obvious, because now there's communication between you and another person. They're coming back to you for clarification. And a lot of times, like young Scott would get super frustrated, right? Why is this happening? Like, I can't trust this person. But it wasn't that they didn't deserve to be trusted. It wasn't that they weren't competent. It's they were in a very natural discovery process of solving problems. But I didn't have the knowledge of that, right? So that is actually exactly what I teach. Like when I teach problem solving, I teach those 6 steps of solving a problem. But that what you're delegating is those learning loops. And when you assign that to a person, you explain that hey, you're going to get into this and we're going to change our mind. We're going to learn something new, right? I can't perfectly define a successful outcome right now because we need to learn on this for a week and then figure it out, right? So that's truly, yeah. So that is one of the things, the core things that you have to master in delegation is this idea that you learn as you go and you have to be comfortable with that.
Mm-hmm. You know, we are entering a new era with AI. Let's talk about this a little bit because it's going to have transformative effects on the workplace. Probably already is. We're not getting reporting on it yet. I was listening to a podcast today by one of the leaders of one of the major AI firms, and he was saying that they're in many job functions, there are going to be the unemployed and the people that are implementing and using AI effectively. There are going to be these 2 groups. So we're going to have a much flatter workplace in 5 years, maybe even 2 or 3 years than we do today, because people are going to get, and I'm playing with these tools. I'm seeing how much more effective I can be, how much more work I can do, much better than I did on my own. So we're going to have one person doing the work of 5 instead of, and in technology on this guy, I'll try to get the name of him, Imad Mustaki. Mm-hmm. I'm probably mangling it. He's one of the founders of one of the AI programs. And now I lost my thought. So we're
AI is gonna increase your productivity, flatten organizations, not need as many people to do the same amount of work.
Right. Oh, I know what it was. He was saying that normally with an AI startup, he would have build a team of 150 to accomplish and get this startup going. And now it can be done by 3 people, especially with writing code. And he's saying, yeah, good thing you got out of the programming business. He's saying 3 years, there will be no coders. Mm-hmm. It'll all be AI doing it and checking it and debugging and all of those things. Mm-hmm. So how is that going to affect? We're going to be doing more. There'll be fewer people doing it. I don't know. Have you extrapolated and begun thinking about this future?
So I've heard that a lot over a 25-year career in tech, right? AI is definitely revolutionary. It is the biggest game changer that I've seen in my 25 years, other than probably the internet itself. But I think back to one of a company I worked for about 10 years into my career. They basically used to have a bunch of really smart math major analysts doing a bunch of spreadsheet work, and we were able to take technology and automate all that work so that they could then go on to do higher value things. And those higher value things they were doing turned that $10 million company into a $500 million company. They never would have been able to grow that company like they did, or leverage the brain power of that team, had that team continue to waste its time on repetitive, low value things, right? So AI is a multiplier in that effort, but I think we're still a couple of decades away from an AI saying that company still needed analysts who understood the context and what was important. Right? AI is good at finding patterns. AI is good at extrapolating and potentially making predictions, but there's still it still needs a human, right? It's not capable of doing all that without a human. Same thing with programming. It can produce the code I ask it to produce, but it doesn't know what it should produce, right? It can produce it more efficiently than I can write it by hand, but it doesn't know what it should do. A human still has to sit there and tell it what to do. So, but I think what it is going to do is it's going to make humans much more efficient, much more productive, those who learn how to do it. It's still, I don't think it's going to be able to, it's going to, you look at the core management functions of setting visions and goals. Can AI replace that? No, I think it's going to augment it, but it can't really replace it. Can it make a plan? I don't know. Can it plan better than a human? I'll believe it when I see it, right? Does it know what resources are really needed to execute this plan, to put this together, to deal with the constraints, to deal with all these kind of things, right? So if you look at a lot of the work, especially of managers, of delegators, of things that happen in a business, I'm not sure what of that AI can truly replace. Is it going to be disruptive? It's absolutely going to be disruptive, but I don't fear it the way I think a lot of people at this point are kind of fearing it.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there's much doubt that organizations are going to get flatter or let's just say do more with fewer people? And what does that do to delegation if you don't have as many people to delegate to?
I don't think organizations are going to get flatter. Because again, I think even look at like somebody like Google. Google said, we don't need managers. So they tried it. And then they figured out, oh my God, we need managers, right? It was this idea of people need to know what to work on. People need to know what their priorities are. Somebody needs to think about this work and make plans and then gather and organize the resources. Like that has to happen. That can't not happen. And just because an organization is flat, what that means is that it's either an inefficient organization where things aren't happening that need to be happening, or there are non-managers doing that management work. So so I don't see it being disruptive to the way humans interact with each other. Right. I think from a collaborative standpoint, from a delegation standpoint, I think we need to improve. That's part of my mission, is to help people really collaborate and interact better together. I don't think AI is going to change that a whole lot. I think it's going to speed up problem solving. It's going to speed up analysis. It's going to speed up some things, but I don't see it disrupting or changing the fundamentals of delegation or management. At least not right now. Now, they'll prove me wrong. it's that's what industry loves to do. But at this point, I still feel like there's just too much of that human element that AI is decades away from truly replicating.
Mm-hmm. Although it's growing and changing so fast, evidently, that we could be at AGI before we know it. So
it is, like I said, it is for the last 10 years, I've watched the technology called blockchain get just all this press and all this stuff. And I've always been like, okay, blockchain is an interesting tool for a very specific problem. I've never understood the hype it's gotten. It's been, the companies I've worked for and clients I've had in the past are like, how do we get blockchain into this? And I'm like, you don't need it. Right? It's not a tool that you need. It's not going to help us at all. But I've also, for the last 10 years, been working with AI, and AI has always been, in the last company we were doing adaptive learning and some different things along that line where we were using AI and machine learning and a lot of different types of things. It's getting simpler to do, right? But to me, AI deserves the attention, like all the attention blockchain got for the last 10 years should have been on AI. Like companies should have been investing much more heavily in AI, and that should have been the thing that's been getting the attention. I think it's going to fundamentally change a lot of things in the next 10 years. And it's going to be exciting to watch. And I think, people just need to embrace the uncertainty and stay flexible, because change is happening much faster now. And that's also part of the manager's job, right? If you look at how will a human solve this or help in the situation that AI can't, right? It's really going to be managing that team through the uncertainty, through the change, through all of the things that are coming down the pipe much faster, and keeping that team engaged and happy and not quitting and not afraid. That's what a manager can do, right? That's what a leader can do. And I don't think AI can do that yet.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I'm old enough to remember the first PCs,
Mm-hmm.
And all these technological developments. And I'm a technophile. I love all of it, and I have never been more energized
Mm-hmm.
than I am today in terms of technology and changing so fast. Watching videos about these new technologies and these new tools, and I'm using it as much as I can. I know we're getting off topic here, and we'll wind
That's
up
okay.
here in a second. But having another techno person to share this with, I think is important or valuable for me. And as an example, I used ChatGPT yesterday to generate some prompts for Midjourney to create some images. So I'm using one to help me create in another. So
I use ChatGPT almost every day. There's another tool I just started using called Copy Coached, which I was able to kind of, similar to you, create some stuff in ChatGPT that I then fed in this other thing. And this thing helped me put together and answer some marketing questions that I've struggled for years to kind of structure some marketing stuff in a certain way. I haven't been able to connect the dots or have the creativity to do this one type of marketing or to this type of a statement. And I use this tool, and in 30 seconds, I dump the prompts in and it put something out, and it's something I've tried to do for 5 years. Right. And so, yeah, I mean, it's the tools, but still there has to be a human to say, is that good or bad? Mm-hmm. Right. And without that judgment of the human, then the AI is just going to sit there and shoot out stuff that it thinks is good, but it's ultimately up to the human to do it. So yeah, it's a fascinating technology that I can't wait to see what happens with it in the next decade.
So as we wrap up, share any insights that I haven't asked you about or you have not talked about that's on your short list when you're doing a seminar with a group. What haven't we covered that's important related to delegation?
Yeah, no, I think we've covered a lot, and I think we've covered the bulk of it. I think people need to recognize that there is the three pieces: skills. You got to have the will to do it. You got to have the emotional intelligence to really follow through, right? And it is a multiplier. Like when the early Scott versus the current Scott is at least getting 3 times the productivity out of my team. And is working a whole lot less. There's a lot less stressed out, right? So it is truly, it is truly, to me, it is the multiplier of the 5 core management skills, and it's also the hardest one, right? So don't assume that just because you're a great role player that you are going to be great at this either, right? It's completely different things. So it's really, but it doesn't take that much effort to learn it, but it's going to take some effort to have the will and the emotional intelligence to follow through on it, right? So it's really, I'm kind of on a mission to teach this to 1 million people, because it is that impactful to business and to people. And the training on it has been historically so bad that it's just really, to me, I just see the impact of it versus the quality of the training to date. And it's just that had to be fixed. So no, I think we've done a pretty good job. We've covered the bulk of what I think people need to understand, and then to decide if this is something they want to go, pursue and put the energy in to get better at.
Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about the ways that you communicate this information. Do you do seminars? Do you have a book? How are you communicating? This sounds like a core mission for you
Yeah.
at this point in your career. How are you executing this?
Yeah. So there's a framework called Delegation Grid. You can get it at delegationgrid.com. That is basically a 3-page PDF that you can download that kind of walks through the 12 strategies. There's 3 different types of things to delegate. There's 4 levels of trust that brings you to 12 strategies. It walks through the 7 steps, right? It walks through that. There's also a free 45-minute lesson on that site. There's no email address required, no gating, no nothing. You just go there, download the framework, watch the lesson. And that alone will put you ahead of 90% of other people in the concept of delegation and what it can do. And then if people want to go deeper, if people want to work with me, then yeah, I do anything from one-on-one coaching, which I'm not doing a whole lot of that anymore, but I'm doing a lot of work with teams. So an owner or CEO will bring me in and say, here's, 6 or 8 of our managers. Let's all work together and master this. And I work with them for 30-day periods. So it's a fairly quick tactical thing, but it brings a much more sophisticated and effective means of delegation to the entire organization, right? To their entire team. So that's the other piece of it. And then I'm starting to do some cohorts, some 30-day cohorts, where if somebody just wants to come in and they don't want to do one-on-one, but they want to do maybe some cohort work, they can do that. So yeah, from the delegationgrid.com website, they can link to my consulting site. And if they're interested in digging deeper into some of those things, then that's also how I support it.
And we'll put those resources down in the show notes so people can look for that. Before we wrap up and have you summarize the different ways for people to reach out to you, let me do something on a personal professional note. And my team that I was referencing is the best team that I have ever had in my professional life. And knock on wood, I've really never had an entire group that was cohesive, worked together. I can depend on them for anything. My clients brag on them all the time. So I must have picked up, I'm not going to take responsibility for it, but I must have picked up something along the way to draw such talented and caring people. And we do not have an office. We are a virtual team and an international team. So we're across time zones, and we sometimes are working at different hours. We're working 24 hours, but around the clock, someone is. Mm-hmm. So, but let me just share that appreciation, because I don't know how often it happens. Mm-hmm. And so I'm really grateful to them. And I'll be sharing this with them. And I've already talked to a couple of clients that were complaining about being too busy and not having enough time and not taking vacation time. So I've already told a few clients that I'm meeting with you on this podcast, and I'm going to send them a link to it. And I'm definitely going to invite my team to watch this as well, so that they can get better at delegation as well. So talk to me about, summarize, what's that website? How do people reach you? Let's make sure people can contact you.
Yeah, no, and that's all great. That's all great. I appreciate it's everything changes when you have great collaboration with your team, right? And you can trust your team and some of those kind of things. So that's great. I'm good to hear that. Yeah. Again, the best place to get started is on the website, delegationgrid.com. You can watch a free 45-minute lesson, download the framework itself. And that is enough for most people, right? That is, that is enough for most people. And if people do want to dig deeper, and really get into, a lot of people will do that and they'll understand the skills of it. But when they go to start implementing it, they recognize, okay, maybe I don't have the will to do this, or maybe I'm lacking the emotional intelligence and I need to work on some of those pieces. And that's all perfectly normal, right? That's all what we all go through that, right? So if they're looking to shortcut some of those things and bring in somebody that can help them, kind of get traction a little bit faster, then that's where they can work with me in a consulting or training way.
And how do we reach you? Give email, phone number, website, other than that
Yeah, you can start at delegationgrid.com. There's a message. You can send me a message through that site. Scottdrake.co is my consulting site as well. Scott@scottdrake.co is the best email to reach me at, but you can also just send me a message through the site. That all still goes through me. I'm still small enough that everything just goes to Scott. So so that's the best way to reach me.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's been really valuable. I know this is something that a lot of managers struggle with, and individuals
Yeah.
in their families as well. And we really didn't talk about that. So maybe we can schedule another one to talk about proper delegation in our personal lives or our non-professional lives, volunteer opportunities, that sort of thing. I would imagine some of the principles will apply, but there are probably some nuances that we could talk about there.
100%. My wife will tell you that Scott was not a good delegator when Scott was first married. So it's a lot of the same stuff. It's a lot of the same things of collaboration and work with people. So yeah, it's really in every aspect of life, it's the same thing.
Great. Well, this has been really valuable, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And thank you for letting me share some of the more personal parts of it. And hopefully those concrete examples were helpful for the audience.
Yeah, Mark, thanks so much. Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate the time.
So thanks to Scott for joining me today to talk more about delegation and how he helps business owners and others, leaders, improve their delegation strategies. To connect with Scott, be sure to check out his information down in the show notes below. You can learn more about Thrive Co-Living Communities in the show notes, as well as our website, www.thrivecolivingcommunitiesplural.org. Not the plural part. don't type out plural. If you enjoyed the episode, leave us your thoughts and comments down in the comment section. Be sure to subscribe if you're not already subscribed, and click the like button if you liked it. And don't forget the notification bell to find out more about future episodes. So thanks again to Scott and to everybody who tuned in today. We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us for another great episode of the Thrive Co-Living Communities YouTube podcast. To learn more about our mission and how you can support our vision of creating co-living communities worldwide, please visit us at thrivecolivingcommunities.org. To receive advanced viewings of our podcast and other exclusive content, find us on Patreon at patreon.com/Thrive Co-Living Communities. You can also learn more ways to support our mission in the show notes below. Amazon Smile, GoFundMe, Kroger, and our own Thrive Gear store, where you can buy t-shirts, hats, and many other items. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.